Hello, hello. All right. Exodus 1. Made it through Genesis. This is a short one, and it'll be kind of fun. This is the sort of stuff that I like because it's so historical, and you can see kind of what's going on. I like to look at history as a puzzle. You know, you have to understand the human nature and the sociology and the cultures of the time and kind of follow why decisions were made and why things went the way they did. That's what makes history fun. It's not memorizing dates and names. It's kind of putting the pieces together and figuring out kind of why or what caused what, and that's what makes it fun. So, Exodus 1. Let's get to work. We'll do King James. That's the best translation anyway. So, verse 1, this first few verses are going to be kind of boring, so I'll just rush through them. Now these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. And all the souls that came in unto the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation, and the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Alright, so it's pretty simple to see what's going on here. I've mentioned a bunch of times in Genesis chapters as well. They get to Egypt, they settle down. 70 descendants of Jacob come in there. Now, it's kind of weird. Like, the good historians will always make mention of this, but a lot of like the Christian commentaries, they don't make mention of this. They make it sound like 70 people alone came with him. Jacob had a household. He had a retainer. So people came with him that weren't of his loins. 70 of his loins came, but more than that came. Now, it wasn't like a huge ungodly number, but it would have been well over 100. Probably closer to 200 to 300 people came to Goshen. Because, again, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's not talked about in churches, but it's obvious in the Bible, specifically Abraham. But all the rest, they are taking in converts. They're teaching the word of God. This is the covenant, to be a priest and a blessing unto the world. Not just to your bloodline is going to succeed. It's your bloodline is going to be a blessing and priest unto the world. It's taking converts. That's what Abraham was doing when he met the angels going to Sodom and Gomorrah. That's why he's building all those wells. It's like reverse Jehovah's Witnesses. Instead of going and knocking on doors, he waited for people to come to his well or by his household, and he talked to them about the glory of one God. And they're wealthy, so they have people that they're taking care of, that are working under them, slaves, peasants, whatever you want to call them. They had a retainer, and these people continued to do this. This is why the Egyptians didn't want them mingling. They had to be in the land of Goshen. They couldn't be with them because the early Jews were much more like Christians today in that they were preaching the word of God, not just to a bloodline, but to everyone. So I always find it funny how they don't mention that. But anyway, 70 members of his family came into him. So let's just say 150 to 200 people total. Now, again, there are people out there who will argue this, but it's obviously true. And and it's sad that it's usually the secular historian who points it out, and the Christians won't mention it. Of course it's true. They had a retainer. They had people that were working for them. They came with them. It wasn't just just their family. All right. So this is just the people that came with them, and they settle there. And now the time between them coming and basically where we pick up here in Exodus is about 400 years. I think the total time they spent in Egypt was 430 years or so. It's a pretty good round estimate there. And Exodus kind of kicks off around 400 years after they've been there. So think of it in two halves. The first half, they're going to become prosperous. We'll get into it. And they're taking care of it. People like them because Joseph did such a good job. But eventually, we'll get into it, it goes the other way. But before we get there, let's just move on. Know that this is starting right after Joseph's death, and this next chapter kind of brushes through quickly 400 years of them being in Egypt. Because it was easy. Now, there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said, again, 400 years, And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest them multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burden, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter and hard bondage in mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them survive was with rigor. Okay, so again, that's 400 years in a paragraph. So let's break it down a little bit more. Understand, they come in there. Again, Abraham, who had no sons at the time, had 319 trained men. Okay, now some of them always didn't just go with Isaac. They went and made their own households, but they took in people and converts and had retainers. And they continue this, not as much in Goshen because there's fewer people and the Egyptians won't let them do it with them. And they kind of have to, so instead of worrying about their flocks roaming and everything, they're able to be at home with their wives and make babies. This is what starts happening. They're able to settle down for the first time, not really be these nomadic people. And that, of course, be fruitful and multiply. It happens because they're with their wives every night all of a sudden. What do you think is going to happen? They start growing in number. Well, originally, this is where Goshen's located, and just because it's a smart political move, the Egyptians not treated him well because of Joseph and what he was doing for them, but they started to use them as like a buffer. They were actually very warrior-type people. They knew how to fight, and they did not get along with a lot of these tribes, the Canaanites and the Hittites. And remember, the Hittites and the Hivites and the Canaanites, who were the Phoenicians, were very powerful in their own right. Powerful enough to threaten Egypt or parts of Egypt. With these Hebrews kind of buffering it, they kind of made that buffer zone for them. But since they weren't always nomadic and traveling anymore, and they were able to be with their wives, they started to multiply while still being this warrior type of people as a buffer zone. And you see how after it's about 200 years go by that a king who first sees that doesn't know Joseph, doesn't know who Joseph is, doesn't care about Joseph or his people, knows that these people are not Egyptian, that they're kind of like this loose ally but isn't like subordinate to them, they're their own people, and what the heck, why haven't we like taken him over? You know, he's not aware of Joseph or what Joseph did or what happened. He's this new pharaoh. And remember, Joseph had planted a lot of seeds for people to not like them down the roads. He kind of did a wealth redistribution during the famine, so a lot of ancient names, powerful families of the Egyptian culture lost a lot of wealth and power. And 200 years later, they still have their name. And now a pharaoh that they can kind of whisper in, who doesn't really trust the Hebrews because they're this warrior class that, as he says, they could join our enemies at any time. They're a buffer, but they're not us. At any time, they could switch sides and overrun us, because what if they join these other peoples? We can't trust them. Look how many of them there are. At the beginning, it wasn't a big deal because they know they weren't big enough to make a difference. But because they were no longer nomadic, their numbers had swelled, and they were a powerful people. They were a warrior-type people. So he gets nervous and says, basically, let's deal with them wisely. Now, you study history, the Egyptian, you'll see that a lot of secularists specifically, the Egyptians never had slaves. And this, to an extent, is true. But when you have a severe class system, caste system, you don't need slaves. You understand? You have to obey what you're being told. You're not called a slave. We don't own you, but you have to do what we tell you to do. So do you understand what happens here? They send taskmasters over these people. Now, they'd already, 200 years gone by since they came in, they'd already known, it's been following kind of like the cultural rules and norms of the Egyptians, and they still worshiped their god and had their own culture, but they got along with the Egyptians, kind of did what they were told for the most part, because why not? These Egyptians were taking care of them, made life easy for them. And eventually this Pharaoh comes in and sends taskmasters over them. And what does he do? He doesn't just put them into slavery. They don't conquer them. They just shift them over. All right, you're no longer free and nomadic. Now you're settled, but you're still your culture and your own warrior class, and you can still, have the right to bear arms. You can still have the right to defend yourself, basically, because you're good people and you'll do what's right and you fight for us. But we don't control you. Well, now they come in and they slowly remove the weapons. They move them from being this kind of warrior type people who are good businessmen also. They raise their livestock in very shrewd business decisions while also being warrior. They got to cut off this warrior aspect of them, because that's what gives the Pharaoh fear. So it moves them from, hey, you're your own type of farmer / business people and warrior people, but we need you to work on this stuff. We need you to be masons and and lay bricks and this sort of thing. This is what we need you for. Come on, we're taking care of you. So he puts taskmasters over them, and they kind of just slowly go along with it. Like, yeah, all right. They don't realize that it's like a forever thing. And again, the last time when the Egyptians asked them, invited them in, it made life easier. So maybe they're thinking, sure, this will make life even easier. We don't have to fight in these wars anymore. We don't have to do battle anymore. This is a good thing, right? So they put them into a labor force and remove the weapons. I mean, it's just funny. I'm not trying to get political or anything, obviously, with pro-gun or all that stuff. But it's here. It's what's happening. Okay, so take it as you will, but that's what's going on here. Set taskmasters over them, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. So they might have even been said, like, you're doing a great thing. And the Jewish people are probably like, all right, whatever, they're feeding us, they're taking care of us. Slowly feeding, the state is feeding them, and their freedoms are being taken away. I know, I'm getting political. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. So that's what's funny about it. The more they're trying to burden them, take away their weapons, put them in labor, make them do stuff for us, kind of beat them down, what happens? They multiply even more. Well, let's think about this. When you have a strong family and a strong culture and a strong set of morals and values, who do you lean on and rely on? Your family. You come back to your family. So the more you're being beaten down, the more you're going to come home and need your wife and need your family. You need that time with them because they're the ones that relieve your stress and relieve this burden. So when you have that strong sense of community, strong sense of family, and you can come back to them, guess what? You're coming back to them more and more. Less and less time spent, doing your own thing, having your own fun, because you're, I'm worn out. The man's got me. And it's not that they go home and they're like mad at the world about it. I mean, some probably were. But they have a strong sense of family, strong community. And so they rely on their family. And because they rely on their family, it creates more of them. Like, the more they beat on the Hebrews, the more they multiply. Because where do you go when you have a strong sense of family and community and you're being beaten on? You go to your family. What's one way that your wife likes to make you feel better? Fruitful and multiply. It's like the more they hammered that nail, the more hammering was being done at home, if you know what I'm saying. It's like, duh. I mean, you think about it, it makes sense. Obviously, it makes so much sense. And it's really funny, actually. All right, so basically, they slowly, after about 200 years, so let's say at year like 160, 180, they start realizing the Hebrews are getting out of control. People start whispering in this new Pharaoh's ears. He doesn't know Joseph. He's like, let's deal wisely with them. They take away their weapons. They take away their warrior class, make them more of a labor force, and become stricter and stricter and stricter and stricter on how much labor they have to do for them. All the while, they're relying, the Hebrews who are being beaten and slowly beaten down over the course of about 50, 60 years, into basically slaves. They're relying more and more on their family and growing even more and more in number. And the Egyptians like, crap. All right, so verse 15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When ye do office of midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved them, the men children, alive. Okay, do you see how easily he says that? You have to understand, human sacrifice, these sort of things, genocide, is nothing crazy to a lot of cultures, ancient cultures, a lot of history. It's not like which it should be. It is today, because we live in a predominantly Christian society. But it wasn't to all these other studies. These polytheistic, they're ultra racist, ultra we're the best. It doesn't matter who these other people, they're not even really humans. This is how it's viewed throughout history. Look at other cultures. This is what it is. Genocide is whatever. They're not even us. It is kill the boys. Do it. And of course these midwives, but the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt said. So first of all, they're Hebrew midwives. I don't know if that means they were Egyptian midwives who dealt with the Hebrews, or if they were Hebrew midwives. Either way, he tells them to kill the boys. They're like, no. They probably do it because they care for children and family to begin with. And then if they're Hebrew midwives, then they know God and know not to kill human life. So they're like, I'm not tainting my soul like that. Are you kidding me? I'm not killing a bunch of babies. And here we get into... But that's also keep the daughters. You notice that? They're like, the Jews seem to have good-looking women back in the day, for sure. And they want those women. They can't get enough of the women. Men, get rid of them. Get rid of those men. But but the midwives feared God, and they didn't kill him. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, Why have you done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? He can't believe they did it. Think about that. He doesn't think that this was that big of a command, even. He's like, why haven't you been killing the little baby boys? I told you to. It's like he expected it so easily of them. That's what's crazy. And understand what that says about their society and their culture. That he expected it easily to be followed. What does that say about the people of the time? So many people want to talk about the horrors that Christians have done throughout history and things like that, which there's plenty of people who call themselves Christians or Christians who have done terrible things. But let's not forget how terrible all these polytheistic, pantheon-worshipping cultures were. Doesn't even compare to the worst Christian culture ever. Doesn't even come close. These were not good people whatsoever. You didn't kill the boy babies? I told you to. Why wouldn't you do it? I can't believe you didn't slaughter all those little boy babies that I told you to. I told you to. Why wouldn't you do it? He's surprised. And verse 19, And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives be come in unto them. So basically, they give birth before we get there. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. That's a typical, go back to they give birth before we get there. Typical man to not understand that, have no, especially ancient man, to have no understanding of women birthing, their time of the month, any of that stuff, just foreign to him. Oh yeah, okay, it makes sense. Every Hebrew woman has a quick birth. Okay, he has no idea, because obviously, he doesn't really care about women. All right. And Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, blah, blah, blah. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. So God took care of the midwives, because basically they told a lie. I mean, again, I'm not saying that it's okay to lie, obviously, but you see throughout the Old Testament that God doesn't really care if you, I bet he still cares. But God is okay with you kind of bending it when it comes to dealing with evil. I still think you should be honest in everything, and I think God would agree with that. but he's not going to get like super pissed at you, these women, for saying that, because they're saying it in order to save the lives of thousands of kids. I don't want to make a whole greater good argument because that can go the wrong way, but you kind of got to see good and see evil when you see good and you see evil. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. That's cool. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Okay, so understand, the midwives are saved. He gives them houses, made them houses. I don't know if that, I looked into it, and I think more likely it's like they became a house, a line within the Hebrew people, is what it's saying. When I was younger, I literally thought they meant like they got mansions. But anyway, he's charged everybody throw these boy babies into the river. He sends his people out. Now, understand, oh God, the Passover, what a vengeful God. He kills the firstborn. He gives Pharaoh every opportunity before he kills the firstborn later on in Exodus that we'll get to. And understand what the Pharaoh just did. God gives Pharaoh every opportunity to avoid it. Every opportunity, doesn't do it. Pharaoh gives Jews no opportunity and does it. Is it just? Is God acting on revenge? If it was revenge, why would he give him so many opportunities? He's doing justice for this crime. There's a difference between justice and revenge. If God just wanted to commit revenge, he wouldn't give Pharaoh all these opportunities when Moses comes to him later, before the Passover. But he does give him opportunities. It's justice, not revenge. And it's justice for this. Cast them all into the river. Pharaoh has an order, sends his men out to kill every baby boy in the Hebrew. Do you understand what that is? No warning, no nothing. Go kill them. Because there's too many of them. And they might eventually turn against us. They haven't. They haven't done anything wrong. But they might. Because there's so many of them. Kill them. I think it's funny how he says cast him in the river. And that is what happens to Moses. He does get put in a basket in the river. So, like, they did obey his command. But that's Exodus 1. It's, like I said, to me, this is what's fun about it, is seeing the history and how it correlates and what leads to what. We saw throughout the end of Genesis, Joseph is planting these seeds for not only this current Pharaoh to love him, but for future people to hate and despise the Hebrews. With the wealth redistribution that he did, with the way that he kind of carried himself, and the decisions he made saved the Pharaoh at the time, and the Egyptians at the time, and made that Pharaoh very wealthy. But about 200 years later, that Pharaoh is gone. Joseph is forgotten by the current Pharaoh, and the Hebrews, they don't even really know why they're there, what's going on with them, but he's being whispered to by these people, these ancient houses who lost wealth and power under Joseph. So they deal poorly with them. Slowly move them from warrior to working class. Or first it starts nomadic, to warrior, to working class, to strict enforced labor class. All the way down to, again, they're not slaves. They're another people. But they're basically... genocide. We can genocide them. That's what point they're at now. So again, they're not slaves. I know the Bible says they're slaves because they are. They are slaves, but they're not called slaves. They're the Hebrews. And we can make them do what we want and kill their babies, but they're not slaves. It's true. They're not slaves, but they are at the same time. So anyway, those are good midwives. Puah and Shiphrah, names you do not hear anymore. They don't commit the genocide. Pharaoh can't believe they don't commit the genocide. Doesn't understand women birthing, so he believes their lie. And then he has his men go out and slaughter them. And that's what we'll get into when we get into the birth of Moses and how he avoided it. But understand what's going on. And understand these cultures of the time. When you read the Bible, study history as well. Not only will it fascinate you, but you'll understand why historians use the Bible so much, because the more and more they do research, archaeology, anthropology, scientific studies, they realize the Bible is so accurate. They find cities that they thought were myth that are in the Bible exactly where they said they're at. All this stuff happens all the time. So if you know the cultures that they're dealing with, you'll see the picture in a much clearer light. Anyway, everyone have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or good night. God bless.